Danforth.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I want to start off because this is the first chance I get to actually address the House since I was re-elected. Just to thank the people of Toronto Danforth for their support, for their faith in the work that I do. I want to thank my amazing campaign team. They were totally relentless. They followed the rule that a candidate inside the campaign office was something that could not be tolerated, and the person had to be pushed out the door at every opportunity. They were good about it. They were totally disciplined. And I want to thank my family, who supported me throughout, and as was said earlier today, were long-suffering in the campaign and the lead up to it. So to all of those, I owe a debt of thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it. But I also want to say I appreciate the opportunity to respond to this bill. I'll be speaking to the first two schedules of what I call the bad faith bill, because I think people have to understand that. I have to understand that this is a bill about breaking contracts, about not respecting rule of law, and a bill that in the end undermines our ability to attract business investment and undermines our ability to take action on climate change. Those are fundamental issues. This bill is symptomatic of Premier Ford's approach to hydro. It's about show. It's about going backwards on the environment. It's not about helping the people. It's about making sure that friends and insiders have opportunities. So let's look at the first part, the first schedule portion of this bill. The Premier campaigned on the question of getting rid of the $6 million man, and as our leader was able to note earlier, what he did in effect was make Mayor Schmidt the $9 million man, because he got a very handsome payout when he left. The bill before us and the Ford platform did not address the fundamental issues, and that's the privatization of the system. That privatization has driven higher costs in this province, has made life difficult for people, has not been addressed. And frankly, you can change all the CEOs and insiders you want, but until you address the fundamental problem of privatization, who owns this electricity system in this province, who benefits, then you aren't going to be able to deliver the solutions that people need. Won't happen. So this bill will provide a cover for the Premier for the backroom deal engineered with the CEO and the directors. We won't know how much money fully the CEO got, and that's something that a number of journalists have noted. What about ongoing pension payments in the future? What about payments to directors? And I think the amendment we're bringing forward to actually require full disclosure of all compensation so people know exactly how much this game of musical chairs is going to cost the people of Ontario is critical for us. I want to note, and this was interesting to me, I got briefed yesterday by Ministry of Energy staff, and I appreciate their thoroughness, that in the bill, the ability for the Cabinet to control compensation will end shortly after the next election. So, friends, the trough is closed briefly, but the trough doors will be thrown open after the next election so that anyone who wants to make $6 million a year or $9 million a year or $15 million a year, come on down, because things are rolling. Things are rolling. I want to talk a bit more about the sky-high salaries and compensation. So the question is, who is going to become the CEO? Who are going to become the directors? And I think you have to look at the record of the last 2 weeks to get a sense of who's going to be there. My colleague, Franz Jelena, the health critic, spoke the other day about the appointment of Ruben Devlin to a $1 million contract to look at the health system. Ruben Devlin, one of his friends, former president of the Conservative Party, in 2006, the hospitals run by Devlin had the second worst death rates in Canada. That's who's going to be advising us on how to deal with health. That's the kind of person who's going to be on the board of or the head of Hydro One in the future. She went on to say, while nurses warned of chronic understaffing at his hospitals, he shut down 3 Toronto hospital sites and replaced them with just 1 P3 hospital. P3 hospital, for those on the other side of the camera, a public-private partnership privately financed with more profits going to the private sector. There's a pattern here. Why did the Premier hand a $1 million contract to his friend instead of investing in frontline services? I think we'll be asking that after the appointments are made to this new Hydro One. And then the appointment of the Commission of Inquiry into the province's finances. Who got the lead? Who got the lead? Embattled former British Columbia Premier Gordon Campbell. Now, Campbell presided over one of the most notorious backroom deal scandals in Canadian history, one which led to the RCMP raiding the BC legislature. Not an everyday occurrence. Not an everyday occurrence, but that's the kind of quality that we're going to be having. So as Premier Campbell cut social services, fired scores of public employees, sold off privatized public assets like ferries and BC Rail's entire operation. Well, my friends, I think you get a sense of the kind of people that are going to follow in the train of the Premier, the kind of people who will be put in charge of Hydro One. And that alone is enough to make us all, what can I say, anxious, uncertain, perhaps unhappy, take your pick. You know, it's sort of like taking Dalton McGuinty and putting him in charge of an inquiry into provincial finances. Because everyone in this room, you all know, yeah, Gordon Campbell is the Conservative version of Dalton McGuinty. A guy who shouldn't be allowed near public finance at all, at all. So let's look at the Tory Hydro Plan. Let's look at the larger context in which we're dealing with this matter. There is a proposal to use hydro dividends to reduce hydro rates, which at the heart of it is not a bad thing, but I have to say to all, currently that flows into general revenues. It goes to schools, to hospitals, so the money's going to have to be replaced. It's not free money. Maybe not a bad idea, but the government or the Conservative Party in the last election didn't provide the full picture of finances, so we don't know how that $300 million or so is going to be made up. I'm sure we will find out, my friends. I'm sure we will find out. The conservation part of hydro operations has been taken out of the rate base and put into the tax base. Now, I want to say to all of you that you can provide electricity services for about 3 cents a kilowatt hour with conservation. Frankly, it's the cheapest you're going to get. And if you use it, if the Liberals had used it, if the Liberals hadn't built all the gas plants they did, because frankly, folks, you heard about 2 that were part of the scandal, but there are a whole bunch of others that are sitting out there just waiting, mostly not operating. If, in fact, they'd put in conservation at 3 cents a kilowatt hour instead of the 15, 20, 30 cents a kilowatt hour we're paying for gas-fired power plants, we'd have a very different picture here in Ontario. But in moving conservation from the hydro base to the tax base, it is going to be vulnerable to cuts in future because Premier Ford is outlining a whole bunch of cuts. He's looking for easy ones. This might survive a year. Conservation programs might survive a year. But I'll tell you, when they aren't out there actively being used to reduce hydro costs, they are going to be vulnerable to being cut. And that is bad news environmentally and economically. Very bad news. All of those things being said, the initial Conservative drive under Mike Harris and Ernie Eves to privatize the system, which was continued and deepened by the Liberals, is something that the Conservatives have shown no interest in ending. No interest in ending. I used to say the Liberals were just Tories in a hurry. It's turned around. Now the Tories are going to be Liberals in a hurry on the privatization stuff. No getting around it. And we all know that with privatization will come those lobbyists who want more and more projects built because they want that business. And so we will continue this process of overbuilding generation, as we have heavily with gas, something we need to get out of. I have heard not a word from this government about looking at the contracts that are coming up to the end of their lifespan that should be cancelled. No, instead, and we'll get into this in the second part, we're going to spend a lot of bucks on cancelling renewable energy contracts when we need that renewable energy, when we need that. So, Last thing, before I go on to the second schedule. I know, Minister, you can hardly wait. I know. I can see the anticipation in your eyes. I can see it right now. That the Liberal borrowing scheme. People are well aware that the Liberals committed us to borrowing $20 billion with another $20 billion in interest that's going to have to be paid. That was their hydro reduction plan. Pretty pricey plan, I want to say to all of you. Part of the Conservative platform. I asked the Minister of Energy about it the other day. My sense is he knows about it, but it's not something he wants to talk about. That program alone, and the billions we're borrowing every year, is going to be a millstone around the neck of Ontarians for years and years to come. So, privatization, the continuation of the borrowing scheme, those things are going to make life very difficult for Ontarians. Not being addressed in this bill. Not being addressed in this bill. So, let's move on to the White Pines wind farm. Governments have the right to cancel projects. Now, I disagree with setting aside renewable energy because I think we're going to need energy in the future, and we're going to need energy that does not emit. But you have the right to say, no, we don't want this contract anymore. What is hugely problematic, aside from those larger considerations, is that you've written a bill that contradicts everything you've said about bringing business investment into Ontario. Because you don't say, we're going to put up a big neon sign at the borders of Ontario, come invest here because we're your kind of folks, and then suspend rule of law. It's not a good thing. Typically, people don't like investing in jurisdictions where the law is murky, where governments can just reach in at any time and say, nah, we don't like the law. You know, it was kind of good a while ago, but we don't like it. We're just going to suspend the rule of law. And that's what you're doing with this. You know, it was interesting. It's not every day that I agree with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and they will be shocked that I am quoting them. Yes, Minister, you know exactly. David Haynes and QP Briefing quotes Ashley Challenor, the Director of Policy for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. The sanctity of contracts is fundamental. The government unilaterally cancelling contracts is harmful to business investment in Ontario. Well, she's got a point. She's got a point. It's not just unilaterally cancelling them, but it's saying to the company that's been cheated out of this contract that they can't sue to protect its rights under the contract. There's a compensation formula. There's an A plus B and C minus D and E equals how much we got to pay you. People can argue about, what's assigned to each letter, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. I'll leave it to them. But what's extraordinary is there's also a section in this Act that says, notwithstanding what the formula produces in terms of money that has to be paid back, we can arbitrarily say, this is how much we're paying. Done. That's amazing. So you cancel a contract, okay, and then you give a formula for determining compensation, and then you say, but if we don't like the outcome, we're not going to have that either, and on top of that, you can't sue us. Well, that's groundbreaking, I have to say. It's groundbreaking. I would say if I was an investor in other parts of the world, I would have real questions about going to Ontario, a place where contracts won't be honored, and when they're dishonored, there's further punitive measures in the legislation. So, if people don't believe that your word is of consequence, in general human interactions, that is really substantial. It's very big when it comes to business. A number of you folks are business people. I think you could speak about how you value those who break their contracts, those who break their word. Maybe it matters to you. I suspect it does. When we were getting briefed yesterday, I asked the staff about the constitutionality of this provision, these provisions saying that contracts don't matter. And I have to tell you, when I was here many years ago, my hair was darker then, Bill 115, the Crush Educators Act, people remember that. Tories at the time voted for it. And we said at the time, this is unconstitutional. And I remember the minister, Laurel Broughton, standing up to assure me repeatedly, no, it's totally constitutional. This is kosher, no problem. Back off, buddy. Anyway, she was wrong. And that was proved when it went to Supreme Court. I'm not a lawyer, people may have noticed. But I did check around to see if someone who knew more about constitutional law than me had any commentary. And there's a guy, Patrick J. Monahan, judge of the Superior Court of Justice in Toronto, former dean of the Osgoode Hall Law School, who wrote the textbook on constitutional law in Canada. So, you know, he's kind of recognized as someone who knows what he's talking about. And he wrote a piece a while ago, Is the Pearson Airport legislation unconstitutional? A few of his comments. The rule of law does limit Parliament's power to expropriate contractual rights. Governments are not above the law. Premier Ford, take note. You are not above the law. This is important for you. There are many others who may think they're above the law, but frankly, you're not. He writes, the Supreme Court has indicated that the rule of law binds Parliament as well as the government, and that the principle can be used to rule legislation unconstitutional. Now, this is an important point, because I think respecting the Constitution is actually a pretty good idea. Whatever flaws there may be in it, in general, it respects our rights. Agreed? Yeah, absolutely. So he notes, a government that regularly breaks its promises for no good reason will come to be regarded as untrustworthy and eventually will discover that no one is willing to contract with it. Good point. He notes, in fact, there is no case which has ever upheld a provincial statute nullifying contractual rights and denying compensation to the owner. I say all this because the government may think that it stepped away from this, said, yeah, that's not to our advantage, we're going to go by, and we'll pay this amount. We may set a smaller amount, but you're going to have to live with it. You know, you may be right, and it may not be possible for the company involved to pay the legal costs of pursuing this case at length. In which case, simply the dishonoring of Ontario, a worldwide statement about our values and our reliability will be made. On the other hand, the company might pursue this legally to the Supreme Court, win a constitutional challenge, and recover damages, as well as us having besmirched our reputation. On a number of levels, this bill is wrong. The government should not have brought it forward. It should abandon it now. And we will certainly be voting against it. We will certainly be voting against it. The last thing I want to say is that this cancellation and the cancellation of hundreds of renewable energy projects says something profound about this government's understanding of and commitment to action on climate change. Many may think on that side that climate change is a distant thing, it's not real, and really, you know, we can say a few nice things now and then it's over. But in fact, it's real. Its impact is now, and its impact is profound. 2014, Toledo, Ohio, had to shut down their water intake because the warming waters of Lake Erie helped develop a huge bloom of toxic algae. They had to shut down their water system for 3 days so they didn't poison that whole system. Just the other day, blue-green algae reported by Toronto Public Health, Mimico Creek. Lake Ontario is deeper. It's colder. It's got more resilience. Lake Erie, not so much. The impact is now. Speaker, you're from Windsor. I've heard rumors. You've gone through flooding in your city a number of times in the last few years. People who had their basements flooded out and their lives completely disrupted. It's real, it's now, and it's affecting people's lives. It's expensive. And when you take a course of action that dismantles those steps that are needed to take on this issue, you are putting people in harm's way. You are putting your society in harm's way, because it will impact individuals and their lives, but it will impact your ability to actually function, to have an economy that's effective, to have an infrastructure that is not damaged. And so on every level, this legislation is wrong. It is morally wrong. It's wrong in terms of the statement it makes about our values to the wider world, and it's wrong concretely in terms of what it will bring to us in the years to come. I only have a few seconds left. I urge the government to think twice about this legislation. All three schedules, my colleague very ably set out why Schedule 3 was one that couldn't be supported, shouldn't be supported by this legislature and by the people of this province. With that, Speaker, I thank you.